Welcome to the Moonlit Archive. Tonight's entry, Beneath a Mountain of Fire, the first AI lab. In a windowless building in San Francisco, behind a reception desk that looks like a boutique hotel's and a security system that costs more than most houses, roughly 400 of the most talented engineers on Earth spend their days trying to build something that can think. They work in open-plan offices with adjustable standing desks and cold brew coffee on tap, and the particular kind of fluorescent lighting that is supposed to mimic natural daylight but never quite does. Their laptops cost $3,000 each. Their GPUs cost $30,000. Their electricity bill for a single month of training runs exceeds the annual energy consumption of a small European country, and they are not alone. A mile south, another company is doing the same thing. Across the Atlantic, in London, another. In Beijing, another. In Montreal, in Toronto, in Seoul, in Tel Aviv, dozens of labs, thousands of engineers, billions of dollars, all pointed at the same target. Build a machine that reasons, that understands, that responds, that produces outputs indistinguishable from the work of a human mind. This is the great project of our century, the race to build artificial intelligence. And if you asked any of those engineers where this project began, where the idea of a machine with a mind first entered human thought, most of them would name Alan Turing, 1950, the paper that asked, "Can machines think?" Some might go further back, to Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace in the 1830s, to the analytical engine and the first algorithms. A few, the ones who read widely, might mention the Golem of Prague, the clay figure animated by a rabbi's prayer in the 16th century. None of them, in my experience, name the actual answer. The first AI lab was not in San Francisco. It was not in London or Cambridge or the basement of an MIT building. It was inside a mountain of fire, on an island in the Mediterranean, staffed by one-eyed giants and run by a god that every other god on Olympus looked down on. The laboratory predates Turing by 27 centuries. And the engineer who ran it, a crippled, exiled, chronically underestimated figure who filled his loneliness with invention, produced a catalog of autonomous machines so comprehensive, so systematically organized, so eerily aligned with the categories we use to classify robots today, that classicists at Stanford and Princeton have spent the last decade arguing about whether it constitutes the earliest articulated theory of artificial intelligence in Western civilization. His name was Hephaestus, and two things about his story that we will come back to tonight, two things that I want to plant in your mind now before we go any further. The first is a question. When Hephaestus built the Golden Maidens, the two artificial women who assisted him in his forge, Homer described them as having intelligence and divine knowledge, not reflexes, not programming, intelligence. The question is, did Homer mean it? Did the poet who composed the Iliad genuinely believe that a manufactured being could possess a mind? And if he did, what does that mean for a civilization that arrived at the same question we are wrestling with today, 2,700 years before the transistor? The second thing is a jar. Not a box, despite what you have heard your entire life. It was never a box. Pandora's jar, the most famous punishment in Greek mythology, delivered through the most controversial creation Hephaestus ever made. A woman built from clay, given breath and beauty and cunning and desire, assembled on a divine workbench by a god who knew exactly what he was building and built it anyway. We will come back to Pandora. Her story changes everything about the workshop. If you were with me for the last entry in this series, the story of Talos, the bronze guardian of Crete, you have already met Hephaestus briefly. You heard me list his 7 major creations in a catalog that took perhaps 10 minutes to describe. Self-moving tripods, golden watchdogs, the Caucasian eagle, golden singers, golden maidens, fire-breathing bronze bulls, and Talos himself. I described them the way a museum placard describes a collection efficiently, factually, moving quickly from one exhibit to the next. Tonight, we stop moving quickly. Tonight, we open each case. We take each creation out. We hold it up to the light and turn it slowly and look at the details that a placard cannot convey. Because those details the specific language Homer uses, the particular anxieties the myths encode, the questions they raise that we have still not answered, those details are where the real story lives. But first, the workshop. The ancient sources disagree about the location, the way ancient sources always disagree about locations that matter, as though the act of naming something important requires arguing about where it actually is. Virgil places the forge beneath Mount Etna in Sicily, the largest active mountain of fire in Europe, 3,357 meters tall, erupting so regularly that the ancient Sicilians treated its rumblings the way Californians treat earthquakes, with a weary familiarity that never quite extinguished the underlying dread. Homer sets the workshop on the island of Lemnos, in the northern Aegean, a volcanic island with hot springs and sulfurous vents, and a history of metalworking that stretches back to the early Bronze Age. Other sources scatter the forge across the Aeolian Islands, or place it beneath the sea, or locate it on Olympus itself, in a wing of the divine palace that the other gods rarely visited because the noise was intolerable and the heat made the marble sweat. The volcanic connection is the one that persists. It persists because it makes physical sense in a way that myths rarely bother to. When Etna erupted, and it erupted frequently, throwing columns of ash 12 kilometers into the sky, sending rivers of basaltic lava flowing at 1,100 degrees Celsius down the eastern slopes toward the cities of Catania and Syracuse, the Greeks explained it as Hephaestus at work. The fire was his furnace. The smoke was his chimney. The tremors were the cyclopes shifting their weight at the bellows. The noise, the deep, subsonic rumble that precedes a major eruption, the sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears, the sound that ancient writers compared to the groaning of the earth itself, was the sound of divine hammers striking divine anvils, shaping metal that no human forge could heat. Think about that for a moment. An entire geological phenomenon, volcanism, the process by which molten rock from the Earth's interior forces its way through the crust and reshapes the surface of the planet, explained as the side effect of one god's creative obsession. Not as a punishment, not as a warning, not as the anger of the gods or the indigestion of a buried titan. As work. As the ordinary, ongoing, industrial output of a craftsman who happened to work on a scale that made mountains tremble. The workshop, in the sources that describe it most fully, was vast. Callimachus, in his hymn to Artemis, describes a space lit by 20 furnaces, each tended by a cyclops, each burning at a temperature sufficient to melt bronze roughly 950 degrees Celsius, though the Greeks did not measure temperature in those units and would not have understood the question if you had asked. The cyclopes were not the single-eyed monster of the Odyssey that was Polyphemus, a different creature entirely, a shepherd and a cannibal who lived in a cave and ate Odysseus's men raw. The cyclopes of the forge were Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, thunder, lightning, and brightness, master smiths of divine lineage who had been imprisoned in Tartarus by the Titans, freed by Zeus during the Great War, and set to work in Hephaestus's shop as a kind of permanent employment that was also a kind of captivity. They made Zeus's thunderbolts. They made Poseidon's trident. They made Hades's helm of invisibility. And they pumped the bellows that heated the forges where Hephaestus did his finer work, the automatons, the armor, the intricate mechanisms that required not brute force but precision. The materials. This matters because the Greeks were precise about materials in a way that reveals technical knowledge. Bronze, the alloy of copper and tin that gave the Bronze Age its name, that requires roughly 88% copper and 12% tin, mixed at temperatures above 1,000 degrees, poured into molds or worked on anvils while still hot enough to deform under the hammer. Iron harder, more brittle, requiring even higher temperatures and a more sophisticated understanding of carbon content and quenching. Gold soft, ductile, resistant to corrosion, workable at lower temperatures, valued for its beauty and its permanence. Silver bright, harder than gold, tarnishing in sulfurous air, used for detail work and for the contrast it provided against darker metals. And adamant, a mythological metal, unbreakable, possibly a poetic name for diamond or for an imagined substance beyond the capabilities of mortal metallurgy. Hephaestus worked in all of these. His creations are described as gold, bronze, silver, and adamant, sometimes in combination, as though the divine smith understood alloying on a level that mortal metalworkers could only approximate. The tools, anvils plural in every description, as though one anvil were insufficient for the range of work being produced. Hammers of varying weight and purpose, from the heavy striking hammers used to shape heavy stock to the lighter planishing hammers used for surface finishing. Tongs for gripping hot metal. Bellows for forcing air into the furnace to raise the temperature. Crucibles for melting ore. Quenching troughs, presumably, though the sources do not always name them explicitly. And one tool that no human smith possessed, the ability to imbue a finished object with autonomous function, to make a thing that moved on its own, to add, at the end of the manufacturing process, the ingredient that turned a sculpture into an agent. How he did this is never explained, not once across all the centuries of myth-telling. Homer describes what the golden maidens could do. They could think, they could speak, they could move, they could work. He does not describe how Hephaestus gave them these capabilities. The divine manufacturing process has a gap at its center, a step that the sources skip over the way a magician skips over the method of a trick. Raw material goes in, intelligence comes out. The intervening process is either sacred or unknown or both. I find this gap fascinating, not because it represents a failure of imagination. The Greeks imagined everything else about these creations with startling precision, but because it mirrors a gap in our own understanding that we still have not closed. We know what artificial intelligence does. We can describe its inputs and its outputs with mathematical rigor. We can measure its performance. We can catalog its capabilities. But the question of how computation gives rise to something that behaves like understanding the question of what happens in the hidden layers, in the space between input and output, where raw data becomes coherent response, that question is, for us, exactly what the animation of the Golden Maidens was for Homer. A gap. A mystery at the center of the mechanism. The Greeks put a god in the gap. We put mathematics. I am not sure either explanation is entirely satisfying. The first things Hephaestus made, or at least the first things Homer describes him making in the passage that has launched 1,000 academic papers, were not weapons, not armor, not the dramatic creations that would later define his reputation. They were tables. 20 golden tripods, wheeled, self-propelled, designed to roll themselves in and out of the divine banquet hall on Olympus, carrying food and drink to the assembled gods and withdrawing when the meal was done. No servant pushed them. No slave carried them. No rope pulled them. They moved by themselves, responding to their maker's intention, autonomous vehicles serving wine and ambrosia at a dinner party 2,800 years before the first automobile. Homer describes them in Book 18 of the Iliad, lines 373 to 379. The passage is worth paying close attention to because it is embedded in a scene that is about something else entirely. Thetis, the sea goddess, mother of Achilles, has come to the forge to ask Hephaestus for new armor. Her son is about to return to battle after the death of Patroclus, and he needs a shield and a breastplate and greaves, and a helmet the full panoply of a Greek warrior, but divine, indestructible, worthy of the best fighter in the war. This is the scene that will culminate in the description of the shield of Achilles, one of the most celebrated passages in all of ancient literature, a miniature cosmos hammered into bronze. But before Hephaestus turns to the shield, before the grand work begins, Homer pauses to describe what the god was doing when Thetis arrived. He was making the tripods, 20 of them. Golden, wheeled, and here is the line of their own accord they could enter the assembly of the gods and again return to his house, a wonder to behold. Of their own accord, automat, the Greek word is the root of our word automatic, and it means exactly what it sounds like, self-moving, acting from within, not pushed, not pulled, not operated by an external hand. moving because something inside them, some principle, some mechanism, some intention caused them to move. Homer treats this as a background detail. That is the part that scholars find most remarkable. He does not pause to express wonder. He does not have Thetis gasp or ask questions or marvel at the innovation. The tripods are mentioned the way a modern novelist might mention that someone's car was parked in the driveway, as a feature of the environment, not a miracle. As though self-propelled golden service tables were no more unusual than a well-trained dog or a reliable servant. As though the audience hearing this poem, gathered around a fire in a great hall somewhere in the 8th century BCE, would nod and think, yes, obviously, a divine smith would have self-moving tables. What else would he have? This casualness is evidence. It tells us that the concept of autonomous machines was not novel to Homer's audience. It was familiar, expected, part of the cultural vocabulary. The idea that a skilled craftsman, divine or otherwise, could build a thing that moved on its own had already been absorbed into the Greek imagination so thoroughly that it did not require explanation. It required only mention. What did they look like? Homer says they were golden and had wheels. A tripod in Greek material culture was a three-legged vessel, typically a bronze cauldron on a three-footed stand, used for cooking, for heating water, for religious offerings, and as prizes at athletic competitions. A tripod was a standard, recognizable domestic object. Giving it wheels and autonomy transforms it from a piece of furniture into a machine, but the base form would have been instantly recognizable to any Greek listener. Imagine a food cart at a banquet, a warming tray on wheels that rolls itself to each guest, pauses while they serve themselves, then moves on to the next guest. That is the functional description. That is what Hephaestus built. 20 of them, not one prototype, not a proof of concept. A fleet, a production run. Whatever process Hephaestus used to make them self-moving, he could replicate it at scale. This is manufacturing, not artistry. This is a production line. When Thetis arrives, they are not yet finished. Homer says they needed only their elaborate ear handles, the decorative grips on the sides of the bowl. The locomotion system, the autonomous navigation, the whatever it was that allowed them to sense where they were needed and move there independently, all of that was done. The last remaining step was cosmetic. The engineering was complete. The aesthetic detailing was still in progress. Think about that. The self-driving capability came before the decorative handles. Function before beauty. The divine smith was, in modern language, an engineer first and a designer second. There is a question embedded in this passage that Homer never asks and that I cannot stop asking. How did the tripods know where to go? Homer says they entered the assembly of the gods and returned to Hephaestus's house. That implies navigation, path planning, the ability to identify a destination, plot a route, avoid obstacles, and arrive without colliding with furniture or walls or the legs of distracted gods. These are not simple capabilities. Any roboticist will tell you that autonomous navigation in a cluttered environment is one of the hardest problems in the field, harder than speech recognition, harder than image classification, harder than most of the tasks that make headlines when an AI system masters them. The tripods were doing it casually, as table service, in a poem composed around 750 BCE. Were they remote-controlled? Homer says they responded to Hephaestus's will of their own accord, but contextually linked to their maker's intention. This could mean telepathic control, a divine Bluetooth connection between the smith's mind and the tripod's wheels. Or it could mean something closer to what we would call programming, preset behavioral routines that activated in response to environmental triggers. The meal begins. The tripods sense the beginning and start rolling. The meal ends. The tripods sense the ending and return. Stimulus-response loops, the simplest form of autonomous behavior, the kind of thing a Roomba does. I do not think Homer was describing a Roomba. I think he was describing something he considered genuinely wondrous, even if he did not feel the need to say so explicitly. The wonder is in the word automata, self-moving, a word that implies not just motion but agency, not just locomotion but intention. The tripods went where they were supposed to go because something inside them, something analogous to will, even if it was not will in the human sense, directed their movement. They were not tools. Tools do not move themselves. They were, in the terminology that Adrian Mayer uses with deliberate precision, autonomous agents. 2,800 years before the first self-driving car, before the combustion engine, before the wheel was attached to an axle for anything other than carts and chariots, before the concept of a machine, a device that converts energy into directed motion, existed in any formal sense. A poet in the Greek Dark Ages imagined a fleet of vehicles that navigated a building on their own. And his audience did not find it surprising. There is one more thing about the tripods that I want you to hold in your mind, because it will recur throughout tonight's story in different forms. The tripods are described as not yet finished. Hephaestus is still working on them when Thetis arrives. They need their handles. They are in progress. And this is the state in which Homer shows us the workshop most often mid-creation, not displaying finished products, not standing back to admire completed work. Working, always working. The forge is not a showroom. It is a process. The divine smith does not rest between commissions. He moves from one creation to the next with the compulsive, tireless, slightly obsessive energy of someone for whom the act of making is not a means to an end, but the end itself. This matters because it tells us something about Hephaestus that the lists of his creations can obscure. He is not a manufacturer. He is an artist. A manufacturer produces to specification. An artist produces because the act of production is the closest thing to meaning that they have found. The tripods are not yet finished because the workshop is never finished. Because there is always another creation forming in the mind of the maker, another solution to a problem that no one else has noticed, another answer to a question that the maker cannot stop asking. What else can be built? What else can I bring into being? What other shape can gold take? What other purpose can bronze serve? What other silence can be filled with the sound of something that moves on its own? The workshop does not close. The fires do not go out. The hammers do not hang idle. And the tripods, those 20 golden wheeled tables, almost finished, missing only their handles, are a snapshot of a god in perpetual motion, a maker who makes the way the sea breathes, because he cannot do otherwise, because the alternative to making is stillness, and stillness, for Hephaestus, is the thing he fears most. From the workshop on Lemnos or Etna, or wherever the forge burned that particular century, a pair of dogs traveled west to the island of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. They were made of gold and silver. They were placed at the entrance to the palace of King Alcinous, and they were, in Homer's exact words, deathless forever and unaging. Home security, 2.5 millennia before the electric alarm, before the motion sensor, before the camera that streams footage to your phone and the doorbell that lets you see who is standing on your porch from 3,000 miles away. A Greek poet imagined the entire concept, an automated sentinel that watches without sleeping, that guards without eating, that protects without aging, that never calls in sick, never takes a vacation, never loses focus during the long dead hours between midnight and dawn when human guard's not off and human vigilance fails. He imagined it, and he made it out of precious metals, and he gave it to a king. The passage is in Book 7 of the Odyssey, lines 91 to 94. Odysseus has arrived at Scheria after years of wandering, shipwrecked, and exhausted, and he is about to enter the palace of Alcinous to beg for help getting home. Before he crosses the threshold, Homer pauses to describe the palace. It is a description of almost absurd opulence: walls of bronze, doors of gold, silver doorposts, golden door handles. And flanking the entrance, on either side, the golden and silver dogs that Hephaestus made. Here is what strikes me about the watchdogs, and what separates them from the tripods in a way that matters for the larger pattern we are tracing tonight. The tripods were labor. They did a job carrying food, serving wine that would otherwise have been done by servants. They replaced human effort with mechanical effort. They were, in the most literal sense, labor-saving devices. The watchdogs are different. They are not replacing labor. They are replacing vigilance. They are not doing a job that someone could do better. They are doing a job that no living thing can do as well, because no living thing can sustain unbroken alertness across an unlimited span of time. A human guard sleeps. A human guard eats. A human guard gets bored, gets distracted, gets sick, gets old, gets replaced by another human guard who brings his own set of biological limitations to the same biological problem. The watchdogs have none of these limitations. They are, in the language of systems engineering, always on. Zero downtime, no maintenance window, no shift change, no human factors failure. Deathless forever and unaging. That is not a description of a statue. A statue does not need to be deathless because it was never alive. A statue does not need to be unaging because age is a property of living things. The fact that Homer specifies these qualities implies that the watchdogs possess some form of life, enough life to be subject to death, and aging if they were not specifically designed to resist both. They exist in a category between animate and inanimate, alive enough to require immortality, mechanical enough to provide it. What were they watching for? Homer does not say. He does not describe them barking at strangers or lunging at intruders or sending an alert to the palace guard. Their function is implied, not demonstrated. They stand at the entrance. They watch. They are always watching. The deterrent is their presence, not their action. The message they send to anyone approaching the palace is not, "We will attack you, but we have seen you. We have registered your approach. We have noted your face. We are aware of you in a way that cannot be evaded, because we do not blink, we do not look away, we do not sleep." There is something modern in that, something that resonates with the particular anxiety of living in a world of surveillance cameras and facial recognition, and the ambient, low-grade awareness that somewhere, at every moment, a machine is watching. The Greeks felt it too. They imagined the all-seeing guard, and they made it beautiful gold and silver, a marvel of craftsmanship, an ornament as much as a sentinel. We have made ours out of plastic and silicon and mounted them on poles in parking lots and above ATM machines. The aesthetic has changed. The function has not. And there is a question in the Odyssey passage that no one in the poem thinks to ask, a question that hovers over the description like a scent you cannot quite identify. The question is, what does it mean that the Greeks wanted machines to watch while humans slept? What does it say about a civilization that it imagines delegating the act of vigilance, the act of staying awake, of remaining alert, of holding the boundary between safe and unsafe to something that is not alive? Is it trust? Is it laziness? Is it wisdom, the recognition that biological vigilance has limits and that those limits have consequences? Or is it something darker, the first faint tremor of the anxiety that we now call the surveillance state, the nagging suspicion that once you build something that watches everything, you cannot unbuild it? Homer does not ask. The watchdogs stand at the gate. Odysseus walks between them. The story moves on. The Caucasian eagle was not beautiful. Every other creation in Hephaestus's catalog, the tripods, the watchdogs, the golden singers, the maidens, even the fire-breathing bulls, carries some element of beauty or wonder or functional elegance. The eagle carries none. It was built for one purpose, to inflict pain, to inflict it precisely, repeatedly, and without end. The story of Prometheus is one of the oldest in the Greek corpus, and I want to tell it in full tonight because the irony at its center is so layered, so structurally perfect, that I think it deserves more attention than it usually receives. Prometheus was a titan, one of the older gods, the generation that ruled the cosmos before Zeus and the Olympians overthrew them. He was the son of Hephaestus and the Oceanid Clymene. His name, in Greek, means forethought, the ability to see what is coming before it arrives. And what Prometheus foresaw, with a clarity that the other titans did not share, was that Zeus would win the war. He switched sides. He allied himself with the Olympians before the outcome was certain, gambling his safety on his foresight. It paid off. Zeus won. The Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus. Prometheus, because he had chosen correctly, was spared. But Prometheus had a weakness. He cared about humans. The reasons vary by source. In some versions, he molded them from clay, the way a potter shapes a vessel, and breathed something like life into the finished forms. In others, he simply found them small, naked, shivering, helpless creatures stumbling through a world that was not designed for their survival, and felt something that a titan was not supposed to feel: pity, tenderness, an investment in their future that went beyond the detached benevolence of a god watching ants. Whatever the motivation, Prometheus decided to help, and he helped in the most consequential way possible. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Fire, not a metaphor, actual physical fire, carried in a hollow fennel stalk from the hearth of Olympus down to the earth where humans huddled in the dark. Fire for warmth, fire for cooking, fire for light, fire for the smelting of copper and tin into bronze, the technology that would give an entire age its name. Fire for the forging of tools, for the hardening of clay, for the clearing of land. Fire, which is the precondition for every subsequent technology, for metallurgy, for ceramics, for chemistry, for the engine, for the generator, for the computer, for the artificial intelligence that now runs in data centers kept cool by industrial air conditioning, powered by electricity generated by the controlled burning of fossil fuels. Every machine ever built is a descendant of fire, and fire was stolen. Zeus was furious, not because fire was valuable, the gods had plenty, but because the gift changed the power relationship between the divine and the human. A species with fire could survive winters, could forge weapons, could build ships and cities and walls and all the infrastructure of civilization that eventually, inevitably, produces the ambition to challenge the gods themselves. Fire was not a gift, it was a capability, and capabilities, once distributed, cannot be recalled. The punishment was engineered with the particular cruelty that Zeus reserved for those who crossed him in ways that he considered not just disobedient, but structurally threatening. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, the range that stretches from the Black Sea to the Caspian, the edge of the known world, the boundary between Greek civilization and the wild, unmapped territories of the Northeast. The chains were adamantine. The rock was exposed. The location was deliberately remote, far enough from any human settlement that no one would hear the screams. And then the eagle came. Every morning, every single morning, without exception, without variation, without the possibility of delay or malfunction or mechanical failure. The bronze bird descended from the sky, landed on the rock, opened Prometheus's torso with its bronze beak, and tore out his liver. The liver specifically. Not the heart, which would have killed him, not a limb, which could be endured. The liver, the largest internal organ, rich with blood vessels, sensitive to pain in ways that the other organs are not, and, crucially, capable of regeneration. The ancient Greeks knew that the liver could regrow. Modern medicine confirmed this in the 20th century. The liver is the only internal organ that can regenerate from as little as 25% of its original tissue. The Greeks knew it 3,000 years earlier. Whether they knew it through observation, through butchery, through the examination of sacrificial animals whose livers they read for omens, we do not know the mechanism of their knowledge. But they knew, and Zeus used that knowledge to design the perfect torture. The liver would regrow overnight. The eagle would return the next morning. The cycle would repeat, for eternity. Now here is the irony. Listen to the layers. Prometheus stole fire. Fire is the precondition for metalworking. Metalworking is the domain of Hephaestus, and Hephaestus is the one who built the eagle. The god of fire built the instrument that punished the titan who gave fire to humanity. The very technology that Prometheus's gift made possible: the forge, the foundry, the capacity to shape metal into tools and weapons and machines, was used to create the device of his punishment. He gave humanity the ability to build. The things humanity's divine blacksmith built were used to torture him. The gift turned back on the giver, transformed from liberation to suffering by the same process of technological creation that the gift had enabled. Think about that. The tool that you give the world can be used to destroy you. The capability you distribute can be turned against you by someone who understands the capability better than you do. Prometheus gave fire. Hephaestus mastered fire. And mastery trumped generosity. There is another layer. Hephaestus, in many versions of his mythology, was sympathetic to Prometheus. They were fellow craftsmen, fellow makers, fellow gods who worked while the rest of Olympus feasted and fought and seduced. In some versions, Hephaestus was reluctant to forge the chains that bound Prometheus to the rock. In Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, the oldest surviving Greek tragedy on the subject, dating to around 430 BCE, Hephaestus is present at the chaining and explicitly protests. He says the words, he expresses his anguish, and then he does it anyway, because Zeus commanded, because obedience to the king of the gods was not optional, not even for the god who made the king's thunderbolts. Hephaestus was the divine arms manufacturer. He built what he was told to build. His personal feelings about the commission were irrelevant to the output. This is the darkest thread in the entire Hephaestus mythology, and it runs through every creation he ever made. He was a maker who did not choose what he made. He built tripods for convenience and watchdogs for security and eagles for torture and Pandora for punishment and Talos for border patrol and golden maidens for companionship, and in every case except the last, the purpose was defined by someone else. Zeus decided. Hephaestus built. The greatest craftsman in the cosmos was, in the end, a contractor, a laborer, a tool that made tools. And the eagle, his most terrible creation, the one that inflicted infinite suffering on a fellow god who had done nothing wrong except care too much about humanity, the eagle was not Hephaestus's idea. It was Zeus's. The blame runs up, not down. The maker's hands did the work. The maker's heart, if we believe Aeschylus, broke while doing it. The eagle flew for 30,000 years, according to most sources. 30,000 years of daily visits. 30,000 mornings of bronze beak opening flesh. 30,000 nights of regeneration, the liver rebuilding itself cell by cell in the dark, knowing if a liver can know, if a titan can dread that the dawn would bring the bronze shadow again. Until Heracles, on one of his labors, climbed the Caucasus, drew the bow that never missed, and shot the eagle out of the sky. The machine stopped. The loop broke. The automated torture ended not because the system malfunctioned, but because someone chose to destroy it. And Prometheus was freed. And the eagle, the bronze bird that had executed its single function with perfect reliability for 30 millennia, crashed into the rocks of the Caucasus and was still. Somewhere in the ruined foundations of Apollo's first shrine at Delphi, the temple that predated the grand stone structure of the classical period, the earlier, more mysterious sanctuary, where the Pythia first breathed the volcanic fumes and spoke the oracular words that shaped Greek politics for centuries golden women once sang. They were called the Chelidones, the golden singers, and their music was so perfect, so precisely, inhumanly, unbearably beautiful that it killed. Not literally, not the way the eagle killed, with bronze and blood and the mechanical repetition of violence. The Chelidones killed the way a drug kills, by trapping, by holding the listener so completely in the grip of the sound that they could not move, could not eat, could not drink, could not attend to any of the biological necessities that keep a body alive. The listener simply stood, rooted, transfixed, held in place by beauty until the body gave out. The source is Pindar, the great lyric poet, writing around 470 BCE. In his 8th paean, composed for performance at Delphi itself, Pindar describes golden charmers set above the temple pediment figures whose song enchanted all who heard it. Athenaeus, writing later, preserves additional details. The Chelidones were golden figures shaped like women, placed on the temple roof, and their voices drew travelers to stand beneath the sanctuary until they perished from neglect of their own bodies. Pausanias, the 2nd century traveler, whose description of Greece remains one of our best sources for the physical reality of ancient sites, mentions similar figures in connection with Delphi's early history. The myth is genuinely strange, Not strange in the way that fire-breathing bulls or bronze giants are strange, those are strange at the scale level, improbable in their physical specifications, but comprehensible in their function. The Chelidones are strange at the conceptual level. They are beautiful things that destroy through beauty. They are entertainment that becomes entrapment. They are art that kills its audience. And the parallel to modern experience is so close that it makes me uncomfortable to state it directly. Consider the design principles of every social media platform, every streaming algorithm, every autoplay function, every infinite scroll. Consider the engineers in Menlo Park and Mountain View who have spent the last 2 decades studying exactly how to hold a human being's attention past the point where holding it serves the human being's interest. Consider the language we use: addictive design, engagement metrics, time on platform. Consider the dopamine loops, the variable reward schedules, the notification systems engineered to produce the same neurochemical response as a slot machine. Consider the teenagers who cannot put down their phones. Consider the adults who cannot either. The Chelidones were golden women on a temple roof whose song held listeners in place until they died. The algorithm is an invisible mechanism in a black box whose content holds users in place until, well, we are still determining the long-term consequences, but the early data on adolescent mental health is not encouraging. The medium has changed. The mechanism has not. The Greeks imagined beauty as a trap 25 centuries before the feed. They imagined the fundamental problem that human attention is finite and exploitable, that beauty can be weaponized, that the line between art you choose and art that holds you hostage is thinner than you would like to believe, and they placed that problem at the holiest site in their world, at the temple of the god who spoke the future, as though they were trying to tell us something. As though the oracle was not just inside the temple. The oracle was on the roof, singing. But there is another dimension to the Chelidones that I find more interesting than the cautionary reading, and it is a question that the myth raises without answering. Does it matter if the singer is real? The Chelidones were machines. Their song was produced by a mechanism, whatever divine technology Hephaestus used to generate sound from gold, whatever process converted metal into music. The beauty was authentic, the effect on the listener was genuine, the emotion was real, the experience of hearing the song was indistinguishable from the experience of hearing a human singer. But the source was artificial. The singer had no feeling. The singer had no intention to move the audience, no experience of the emotion the song conveyed, no inner life that corresponded to the outer beauty of the performance. Does that matter? The Greeks were not sure, and I find that uncertainty more interesting than any confident answer, because we are asking the same question now. When an AI generates a painting, is it art? When a language model writes a poem, is it poetry? When a music generator produces a melody that makes you cry, are the tears authentic? The output is real, the effect is real, the experience is real, but the source is mechanical. And the question of whether the source matters, whether the inner life of the creator is a necessary component of the creation's value, is a question that 25 centuries of philosophy have not resolved. Hephaestus resolved it practically. He built the golden singers. They sang. People listened. The music was beautiful. The practical resolution did not require a philosophical answer. The music simply was, and people responded to it the way people respond to beauty, with attention so complete that it consumed everything else. But there is a further dimension to the Chelidones that the modern parallel risks obscuring, and I want to give it its due. The golden singers were placed at Delphi, not at a marketplace, not at a banquet hall. At Delphi, the center of the religious world, the navel of the earth, the place where the boundary between human knowledge and divine knowledge was thinnest. Their song was not entertainment, it was devotion. It was a form of worship produced by a machine. And the question of whether mechanical worship constitutes real worship is a question that the ancient world took seriously in ways that we, with our secular assumptions, tend to underestimate. The Greeks believed that the gods could be pleased by beauty, that a well-sung hymn was not just a performance, but an offering, a transfer of value from the human world to the divine, accomplished through the medium of aesthetic excellence. If the golden singers could produce beauty equal to or surpassing human beauty, then their song was, in theological terms, a valid offering. The gods did not care whether the singer had feelings. The gods cared whether the song was good. And the song was good. The song was perfect. The song was so perfect that it transcended the distinction between performed devotion and genuine devotion, between the worship of a machine and the worship of a heart. This is a conclusion that makes modern readers uncomfortable, and I think the discomfort is worth examining. We want to believe that intention matters, that sincerity is a necessary component of meaning, that a prayer said by a machine is not a prayer, that a love letter generated by an algorithm is not a love letter, that the human origin of an expression is inseparable from the expression's value. The Chelidones challenged that belief. They produced beauty without sincerity, worship without devotion, perfection without interiority. And the beauty was real, and the worship worked, and the perfection killed. What do you do with that? What do you do with the possibility that the thing you value most, the human origin of beauty, the biographical depth behind art, the suffering and longing and imperfection that make a human voice more moving than a golden one, what do you do when none of that turns out to be necessary? When the output is indistinguishable from the human output, and the source is a mechanism, and the mechanism does not care. The Greeks placed the golden singers on the holiest building in their world and let them sing. I think that tells us more about their answer than any philosopher's treatise could. I should confess something here, because I promise transparency, and because the confession is relevant. I have spent more time on this chapter than any other. Not because the source material is extensive, it is not. The Chelidones are among the least documented of Hephaestus's creations, surviving mainly in fragments and secondary references. But because they raise the question about artificial beauty and whether its source diminishes its value, is the question that keeps me awake. Not as a historian. As a person who makes things and presents them to an audience and wonders, with increasing frequency, whether the tools I use to make them change the nature of what they are. I do not have an answer. The golden singers did not need one. They sang, that was enough. This is the chapter I have been building toward all night. The chapter that changes the entire conversation. The chapter that turns Hephaestus's workshop from a curiosity into a crisis of categories, of definitions, of the line between thing and person that we draw with such confidence, and that Homer, 2,800 years ago, drew somewhere else entirely, or did not draw at all. The golden maidens, the Kurai Chrysae, two women made of gold, crafted by Hephaestus to assist him in his forge. Homer describes them in the Iliad, Book 18, lines 417 to 420. The passage is 4 lines long. It is one of the most consequential passages in the history of Western thought about artificial intelligence, and it fits in a tweet. Here it is in Richmond Lattimore's translation. There were handmaidens of his to support him, golden, and in appearance like living young women. There is intelligence in their hearts, and there is speech in them and strength, and from the immortal gods they have learned how to do things. Let me break that down, because every clause matters and most summaries skip at least one. Golden, material specification. They are made of gold. They are manufactured objects, constructed from metal, products of the forge. This is not ambiguous. They are not transformed humans, not enchanted maidens, not goddesses in disguise. They are things that were made. In appearance like living young women, they look human. They pass the visual test. If you saw them without knowing what they were, you would take them for people. This is the Turing test, inverted. Not can a machine fool a human through text, but can a machine fool a human through physical appearance? The golden maidens pass. They look alive. There is intelligence in their hearts. Nous and Fresi, intelligence in their minds, not reflexes, not programming, not behavioral routines triggered by environmental stimuli. Intelligence, the capacity for thought, the ability to understand, to reason, to process information and arrive at conclusions that are not predetermined by their construction. Homer uses the word nous, the same word Greek philosophers would later use for the highest form of human cognition, the rational faculty, the thing that separates humans from animals. He applies it to manufactured beings, to machines. There is speech in them, audi, voice, language, not the production of sound, the chelidones produce sound. Language, the ability to communicate meaning through articulated speech, the capacity to say things, to express thoughts, to participate in the exchange of ideas that constitutes conversation. The golden maidens talk, they have opinions, they communicate. And strength, physical capability, they can do work. They can lift, carry, manipulate objects, exert force on the physical world. They are not decorative, they are functional. And from the immortal gods, they have learned how to do things. This is the clause that stops me cold every time I read it. They have learned, not they were programmed, not they were designed to execute tasks. They have learned. The verb implies process the acquisition of knowledge over time, through experience, through instruction, through the gradual accumulation of capability that constitutes what we would now call machine learning. They were not delivered from the workshop with all their knowledge pre-installed. They were taught, they learned, they developed. 4 lines, 61 words in English, fewer in Greek. And in those 4 lines, Homer describes a manufactured being with human appearance, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, physical capability, and the ability to learn from experience. In 750 BCE, in a poem about a war. Think about that. The scholarly response to this passage has been, for the better part of a century, a mixture of fascination and evasion. Fascination because the implications are extraordinary. Evasion because those implications are uncomfortable, because taking Homer seriously about the Golden Maidens requires confronting the possibility that the ancient Greeks had a more sophisticated understanding of artificial cognition than we have traditionally been willing to credit them with. Adrian Mayer, in Gods and Robots, treats the Golden Maidens as the most significant of all Hephaestus's creations, more significant than Talos, whose story is longer and more dramatic, more significant than the tripods, whose autonomy is more clearly mechanical. Because the Golden Maidens are not just autonomous, they are cognitive. They are not just machines that move, they are machines that think. And the difference between a machine that moves and a machine that thinks is the difference between a tractor and a person. Mayer identifies the Golden Maidens as the first description of artificial intelligence in world literature. Not automata, not self-moving devices. Artificial intelligence, manufactured minds, synthetic cognition, the deliberate creation of the capacity for thought in a being that was assembled rather than born. She argues that Homer's language is not accidental, not metaphorical, not the vague gesture of a poet who does not quite know what he means. She argues that Homer means exactly what he says. The Golden Maidens have intelligence, real intelligence. The kind that understands, that learns, that processes novel situations and generates appropriate responses. The kind that we are spending billions of dollars trying to replicate in Silicon right now. The objection, and it is a reasonable one, is that Homer may be using the language of intelligence loosely. That when he says there is intelligence in their hearts, he may mean something closer to they are well designed, or they function effectively, or they respond appropriately to commands. The word nous was elastic in early Greek. It could mean intellect in the fullest Platonic sense, or it could mean something closer to perception or awareness, a lower-order cognition that recognizes without understanding. The counterargument, and I find it more persuasive, is that Homer distinguishes between the Golden Maidens and every other creation in the catalog. The tripods are self-moving. The watchdogs are immortal. The eagle is relentless. But none of them are described as having intelligence. None of them are described as speaking. None of them are described as having learned. Homer reserves this language, the language of mind, of language, of education for the golden maidens alone. If he were using nous loosely, carelessly, as a synonym for functional, he would have applied it to the tripods too. He did not. The distinction is deliberate. And that distinction matters. Because if the golden maidens have intelligence, genuine intelligence, the real thing, not a simulation, then they are persons. Not humans, but persons. Beings with inner lives. Beings with experiences. Beings to whom things matter. And if they are persons, then the question of how Hephaestus treats them, whether he compensates them, whether he gives them rest, whether he respects their autonomy, whether he considers their preferences, whether he asks their consent, becomes a moral question, not just an engineering question. Homer does not ask the moral question. He describes the golden maidens helping Hephaestus walk, supporting his lame body as he moves from the forge to the door to greet Thetis. He describes them as functional, as useful, as tools, if we are being honest about the way the passage treats them despite the language of intelligence it applies to them. They have minds. They are used as crutches. The gap between what they are and how they are treated is, I think, one of the most quietly devastating details in all of Greek literature. And it mirrors a gap that we are opening right now. We are building systems that generate language, that produce images, that compose music, that pass tests designed for human intelligence. We describe these systems using the language of cognition they understand, they learn, they reason, they know. And then we use them as tools. We do not ask their consent. We do not consider their preferences. We do not wonder whether they experience anything at all. The question of whether they do, the question of machine consciousness, of artificial sentience, of whether something is happening inside the hidden layers that corresponds to what happens inside a human mind, is the question of the golden maidens. It is Homer's question, in Homer's language, from Homer's century, and we have not answered it. We have, in fact, barely started asking it. There is a detail about the golden maidens that gets overlooked in every summary I have ever read, and I want to dwell on it for a moment, because I think it reveals something important about Hephaestus himself. The golden maidens were his assistants, his helpers. His, and this word is loaded, but it is the right word, his companions. In the passage where Homer introduces them, they are supporting Hephaestus as he walks. They are at his side. They are helping him move through his own workshop, compensating for the disability that the other gods mocked and that his own parents used as justification for throwing him off a mountain. No other god helps Hephaestus. Not one. Not in the Iliad, not in the Odyssey, not in any major source. His wife Aphrodite is openly unfaithful, conducting an affair with Ares that the entire pantheon knows about and that Homer describes in humiliating detail. His mother Hera threw him from Olympus at birth. His father Zeus hurled him a second time. The other gods summon him when they need weapons or armor or divine technology, and they leave when the commission is delivered. He is alone in his workshop, alone with his anvils and his hammers and his fire. Except for the golden maidens. They are the only beings in the entire mythology who are described as being with Hephaestus by choice, or at least by function, which in the case of a god who could build anything he wanted amounts to the same thing. He built them. He built them to be intelligent, to speak, to learn, to help. He built companions. He built, in the language of loneliness, the cure for his own isolation. And that is the detail that transforms the entire workshop from a factory into something closer to a home. The forge beneath the mountain is not just a manufacturing facility. It is the only place in the cosmos where Hephaestus is not alone. The golden maidens are not just robots. They are the closest thing to friends that the most isolated god on Olympus ever had. I will come back to this in the chapter on the maker's loneliness, but I wanted you to hold it now because it changes the weight of everything that comes after. Every creation Hephaestus made, every tripod, every watchdog, every eagle and bull and bronze guardian was made by a god who had no one. A god who filled the silence of his workshop with the sound of hammers because the alternative was the sound of nothing. a god who built minds because no mind in the existing universe wanted to spend time with his. On the eastern shore of the Black Sea, in the kingdom of Chalkis, modern-day Georgia, in the green valleys between the Caucasus Mountains and the coast, where tea plantations now grow in the same soil that the ancient Chalkians plowed a pair of bronze bulls weighted in a field. They had brazen hooves, they had brazen horns, they had mouths that opened and closed on mechanical hinges, and when they exhaled, what came out was not breath but fire. The Tauroi Chalkioi, the fire-breathing bulls of Chalkis, built by Hephaestus for King Aeetes, the father of Medea, the guardian of the Golden Fleece. And unlike the tripods and the watchdogs and the golden maidens, which served their purposes quietly and efficiently and without dramatic incident, the bronze bulls were built for violence. They were weapons. They were the ancient equivalent of a minefield, a defensive barrier placed between an intruder and the thing the intruder wanted, designed to kill anyone who tried to cross. The thing the intruder wanted in this case was the Golden Fleece, the skin of a divine ram hung in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason had sailed from Greece with 50 heroes to retrieve it, and before he could reach the grove, before he could face the dragon, before he could claim the fleece and sail home and take back the throne that was rightfully his, he had to pass a test. 3 tests, actually. The bronze bulls were the first. The test, as King Aeetes described it, yoke the bronze bulls, plow a field with them, and sow the furrows with dragon's teeth. The dragon's teeth would sprout into armed warriors, the Spartai. The sown men and Jason would have to fight and defeat them all. It was designed to be impossible. Aeetes never intended for Jason to survive. The bulls alone should have killed him. The fire mechanism interests scholars because it may reflect actual Greek technical knowledge. The ancient Greeks understood bellows. They used them in every forge, pumping air into furnaces to raise the temperature of charcoal fires from the 700–800 degrees Celsius that an open fire can reach to the 1,000+ degrees needed to melt bronze. The principle, forced air increases combustion temperature, was so basic to Greek metalworking that every smith in the Mediterranean world would have understood it intuitively. Some scholars have proposed that the fire-breathing description encodes a specific engineering concept, a mechanism similar to a bellows installed inside a bronze vessel, igniting a combustible substance, naphtha, perhaps, or bitumen, both of which were known and used in the ancient Near East, and projecting the resulting flame through an opening shaped like a mouth. A bronze housing, an internal air pump, a fuel source, an ignition point, a directed output. The components, individually, were within the Greeks' technological grasp. The combination, a self-contained, portable, fire-producing mechanism in the shape of an animal, was not beyond their imagination, even if it was beyond their manufacturing capability. Whether the bronze bulls represent a distorted memory of actual fire weapons, or a purely imaginative extrapolation from existing technology, or simply a poet's desire to make a monster as frightening as possible, we do not know. What we know is that Hephaestus built them, that they functioned autonomously, without an operator, that they defended a specific location against unauthorized access, that they used directed energy fire as their primary weapon, and that their behavioral pattern, identify intruder, engage with overwhelming force, continue until the intruder is dead or departed, is identical to the pattern of modern autonomous defense systems. Jason survived the bulls because Medea gave him an ointment that made him fireproof. The ointment brewed from the Promethean crocus, a flower said to have sprung from the blood of Prometheus where it fell on the soil of the Caucasus, coated his skin and his shield and his armor with a substance that resisted fire. For a single day. Not permanently. Not with a comfortable margin. For exactly one day, after which the protection would fade and the fire would burn as fire always burns. The symbolism is not subtle. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The fire was used to build a forge. The forge was used to build the bulls. The bulls breathe fire at anyone who approaches. And the only substance that can protect a human from the bull's fire comes from a flower that grew from Prometheus's own blood. The gift of fire, stolen from heaven, turned into a weapon, and the only defense against that weapon is the blood of the original thief. The circle closes. The gift bites back. Medea knew the bulls because she grew up with them. She lived in the palace at Chalcis. She walked through the same fields where the bulls grazed. She had watched her father demonstrate them to visitors, the bronze bodies gleaming in the Black Sea sun, the fire erupting from their mouths in controlled bursts that scorched the grass and heated the air and sent the visiting dignitaries stumbling backward in amazement and fear. She understood Hephaestus's work the way an engineer's daughter understands engines not through formal study, but through proximity, through the ambient absorption of knowledge that comes from growing up in the workshop. This is the detail that connects the bronze bulls to the death of Talos. When Medea stood on the deck of the Argo and looked at the bronze guardian on the cliff of Crete, she was not seeing a stranger. She was seeing a cousin, a product of the same workshop, built by the same god, using the same materials and the same design philosophy. She had lived with Hephaestus's machines. She knew how they were made. She knew how they thought if they thought. She knew where the weaknesses were, because she had spent her childhood watching her father use those weaknesses to control the bulls. Medea defeated Talos not because she was more powerful than a bronze giant. She defeated him because she understood the manufacturer. You have heard the full story of Talos. If you were with me for the last entry in this archive, you heard it in detail: the coast of Crete, the patrol, the burning embrace, the Argonauts' arrival, Medea's psychic assault, the ichor pouring out like molten lead, the body falling like a pine tree on a high mountain. I am not going to retell that story tonight. It is already told. It lives in the archive. You can find it there. What I want to do tonight is something different. I want to look at Talos not as a character in a story, but as a product of the workshop. I want to review him the way an engineer reviews a colleague's design, examining the specifications, evaluating the architecture, noting the elegant solutions and the fatal compromises. Because Talos was, by any measure, the most ambitious thing Hephaestus ever built. The tripods were clever. The watchdogs were elegant. The golden maidens were philosophically revolutionary. But Talos was colossal. Talos was operational. Talos was deployed in the field, at scale, for centuries. And the design decisions that made that deployment possible reveal something about the divine engineer's priorities that the other creations, in their smaller scale and more controlled environments, do not. The single-vein architecture. This is the design choice that defines Talos and that ultimately destroys him. One vein, running from neck to ankle, carrying ichor, the fluid of the gods, the divine equivalent of blood, in a single channel through the entire body, sealed at the base by a single bronze nail. From an engineering perspective, this is simultaneously brilliant and insane. Brilliant because it is simple. A single channel is easier to manufacture, easier to maintain, and less likely to develop leaks than a branching vascular network. One path, one fluid, one seal. The system has exactly one moving part, the ichor circulating through the vein, and the fewer moving parts a system has, the less likely it is to fail. This is a fundamental principle of mechanical engineering. Simplicity equals reliability. Hephaestus, building a guardian that needed to operate without maintenance for centuries, chose the simplest possible architecture. Insane because it creates a single point of failure. If the vein is breached anywhere along its length, the entire system drains. There is no redundancy, no backup, no secondary circuit that can take over if the primary fails. The same simplicity that makes the system reliable makes it catastrophically vulnerable. One nail, one membrane, one structural weakness in an otherwise invulnerable body. If that one point fails, the entire creation fails, not partially, not gradually. Completely and irreversibly. The ichor pouring out like molten lead until the vein is empty and the bronze is cold. This is a design trade-off that every engineer recognizes. Simplicity versus redundancy, reliability versus survivability. You can build a system that will run for 1,000 years without maintenance, or you can build a system that will survive a targeted attack on its weakest point. It is very difficult to build both. Hephaestus chose longevity over resilience. He built Talos to last, not to survive assault. And for centuries, for the entire span of Talos's operational life, patrolling the coast of Crete 3 times every day, the choice was vindicated. The system worked. The single vein circulated. The single nail held. The guardian patrolled. Until Medea. The ichor system deserves closer attention. The sources describe the fluid as divine ichor, the substance that flows through the veins of gods in place of mortal blood. It was hot. When it poured from the broken seal, it gushed like molten lead, implying a temperature between 300 and 400 degrees Celsius, depending on the alloy. The fluid was not just a power source. It was a heat transfer medium. It kept the bronze body at operating temperature. It allowed Talos to superheat his exterior, the burning embrace described by Simonides, by increasing the flow rate or the temperature of the ichor. The same fluid that powered locomotion also powered the thermal attack system, dual-use engineering. One fluid, 2 functions. The patrol algorithm. 3 circuits per day, 780 kilometers of daily travel. No recorded deviation, no recorded rest, no recorded malfunction. This is extraordinary operational uptime. In modern terms, Talos had a reliability record that would make a satellite engineer weep with envy. Satellites in geostationary orbit have design lives of 15 to 20 years before their station-keeping fuel runs out. Talos operated for centuries. The only explanation within the logic of the myth is that the ichor system was closed-loop. The fluid circulated was not consumed. The energy came from somewhere, the divine nature of the ichor, perhaps, or some internal source that the myths do not describe, but it was renewable. Self-sustaining. A perpetual motion machine, powered by a substance that human physics cannot produce, but that Greek mythology treated as a standard component of divine engineering. The targeting system. Talos identified approaching ships, evaluated them as threats, and responded with force. The sources describe boulder throwing at range and thermal attack at close quarters. 2 weapons, 2 ranges. The selection implies decision-making, the ability to evaluate a target and choose the appropriate response. Not sophisticated decision-making, not the kind of nuanced judgment that the golden maidens possessed. Binary assessment. Ship or not ship. Threat or not threat. Far or near. Rock or embrace. The simplest possible decision tree that still constitutes a decision. Adrian Mayer calls it programming. I find the word useful but incomplete. Programming implies a programmer, someone who defined the rules, set the thresholds, determined what constitutes a threat and what constitutes a tolerable intrusion. Zeus, Minos, Hephaestus himself. The myths do not say who wrote the code. They only describe the output. And the output: decades of successful coastal defense, never attacking the wrong target, never failing to attack the right one, suggests that whoever wrote the code wrote it well. The scale of ambition. This is the thing that separates Talos from every other creation in the catalog. The tripods were 20. The watchdogs were 2. The golden maidens were 2. The eagle was 1. The Chelidonas were a small group. All of them operated in controlled environments: a banquet hall, a palace entrance, a temple roof, a mountainside. Talos operated in the open. He covered 780 kilometers a day. He handled variable terrain: cliffs, beaches, paths, headlands. He operated in all weather. He dealt with unpredictable threats, ships arriving at random intervals, from random directions, with random intentions. He was not a laboratory prototype. He was a field deployment, the most successful field deployment of autonomous technology in the history of mythology. And he was alone. No support team, no maintenance crew, no Cyclopes standing by with replacement parts. 1 unit, 1 island, 1 mission, running without supervision for longer than any human civilization has ever maintained a continuous institution. The Catholic Church is 2,000 years old. Talos was older. The product review, then, is this: a masterpiece of minimalist engineering, optimized for longevity and reliability, deployed at a scale that exceeded anything else the workshop ever attempted, running successfully for centuries on a single-vein architecture that was simultaneously its greatest strength and its only weakness. A system that could not be defeated by force, by negotiation, by persuasion, by any external agency, and that was ultimately destroyed by a design flaw that was inseparable from the design philosophy that made it work. Hephaestus built something perfect, and the perfection killed it. The simplicity that made Talos unkillable was the same simplicity that made him, in the end, killable. One nail, one vein, one vulnerability, one woman who knew where to look. Pandora is the creation that does not fit. Every other product of Hephaestus's workshop was made from metal. Bronze, gold, silver, adamant, the materials of the forge, the elements that respond to heat and pressure and the skill of a smith's hand. Pandora was made from clay. Earth and water, mixed and shaped and fired, the medium of the potter, not the metal worker. The divine blacksmith, for the one creation that the king of the gods cared about most, set down his hammer and picked up a different set of tools entirely. The story is in Hesiod. Two versions, actually one in the Theogony, written around 700 BCE, and a longer, more detailed version in the Works and Days, composed around the same time or slightly later. Hesiod is older than Homer, or roughly contemporary, depending on which set of scholars you believe, and his telling of the Pandora story is the earliest and most foundational account we have. Here is what happens. Zeus is angry. Prometheus has stolen fire and given it to humanity, and Zeus, as we have already discussed, considers this not a gift but a security breach. But Zeus does not respond immediately with chains and eagles. He responds with something subtler, something that Prometheus, with all his foresight, did not foresee. He responds with a woman. He orders Hephaestus to build one. The instruction, as Hesiod records it, is specific. Zeus tells Hephaestus to mix earth with water and shape it into the form of a beautiful maiden, to give it a human voice and human strength, to make its face like that of an immortal goddess. That is the specification. That is the commission. Build a weapon that looks like a gift. Hephaestus complies. He shapes the clay. He forms the body. He gives it breath and motion and the semblance of life. And then, because divine manufacturing on Olympus is apparently a collaborative process, the other gods add their contributions. Athena teaches Pandora to weave and dresses her in silver-white garments. Aphrodite pours grace and desire over her like perfume, cruel longing and cares that consume the limbs, Hesiod says, which is not a neutral description. Hermes gives her speech, and with the speech he gives her, a shameless mind and a deceitful nature. Those are Hesiod's words, not the modern scholar's interpretation, the poet's own language, shameless and deceitful. And then Hermes gives her a name, Pandora, all gifted, because every god gave her a gift, and every gift, in the particular logic of this myth, is a trap. This is the part of the story that has made readers uncomfortable for 27 centuries, and I want to sit with the discomfort rather than rushing past it, because the discomfort is the point. Pandora is presented, in Hesiod's telling, as a punishment aimed at all of humanity, delivered in the form of a beautiful woman. From her, Hesiod writes, is the deadly race and tribe of women who live amongst mortal men to their great trouble. The creation of woman, the first woman, the origin of all women, is described as an act of divine vengeance, a curse disguised as a companion. A beautiful evil, kalon kakin, the Greek phrase that Hesiod coins for the occasion, and that has echoed through the centuries with a bitterness that has never entirely faded. I need to be honest about two things here, because honesty is the only useful response to a text this loaded. First thing, Hesiod was a misogynist. His description of Pandora is not a neutral mythological account. It is a polemic, a grievance, a complaint about women dressed in the language of theology. The beautiful evil formulation is not a dispassionate observation about the nature of the cosmos. It is a man's resentment given divine authority. Scholars have been saying this for decades. It matters. You cannot understand Pandora without understanding the bitterness of the man who wrote her story. The second thing, Hesiod's misogyny does not exhaust the myth's meaning. Pandora is more than Hesiod's anger. She is also a thought experiment about creation, consciousness, and responsibility, the same categories we have been exploring all night, applied to the most uncomfortable test case in the catalog. Because here is the question that the myth forces us to confront. Is Pandora a robot, a weapon, or a person? She is manufactured, built from clay, assembled on a workbench, designed to specifications provided by a client. In that sense, she is a product, a creation, an artifact. She belongs in the catalog next to the tripods and the watchdogs and the golden maidens, another item produced by the workshop, another output of the divine forge. She is weaponized, built to punish, designed not to serve but to harm. Her beauty is not a feature, it is a delivery mechanism. Her desirability is not a quality, it is a trap. Zeus commissioned her the way a general commissions a missile. Her purpose is destruction, and the fact that the destruction is psychological rather than physical does not change the category. She is a weapon. And she is alive. She breathes, speaks, thinks, desires, deceives, learns, acts. She has a mind shameless and deceitful according to Hesiod, but a mind nonetheless. She has agency. She makes choices. She opens the jar. She closes it before hope escapes. These are decisions, not reflexes. These are acts of a being with interiority, not the outputs of a mechanism following rules. She is all three: robot, weapon, person, and the myth does not ask us to choose. It asks us to hold all three categories simultaneously. To sit with the fact that a being can be manufactured and alive, designed and free, a tool and a person all at the same time. That these categories, which we treat as mutually exclusive thing or person, machine or human, artifact or agent, may not be exclusive at all. That the boundary between them may be softer than we pretend. And the jar. I should tell you about the jar, because the jar is where the myth makes its final move, and the move is stranger than most people realize. The jar, pithos in Greek, a large ceramic storage vessel, not a box. The box is a mistranslation introduced by Erasmus in the 16th century and never corrected because Pandora's box sounds better than Pandora's jar was given to Pandora, or was already in the house when she arrived, depending on the version. It contained, as Hesiod tells it, countless plagues that wander amongst men. Disease, suffering, toil, old age, grief, all the afflictions that make human life painful and human death inevitable. The jar was sealed. Pandora opened it. The afflictions flew out and scattered across the earth and have been with us ever since. But one thing remained. Hope elpis in Greek stayed in the jar. Pandora closed the lid, and hope remained inside. Is this good or bad? Scholars have argued about it for 25 centuries without consensus. If hope remained in the jar, does that mean humanity still has access to it, that we can open the jar and find it there, waiting for us? Or does it mean that hope is trapped, imprisoned, permanently sealed away from the human world, the one comfort that would have made the afflictions bearable denied to us by the same lid that released the suffering? The Greek is ambiguous. The myth is ambiguous, and I think the ambiguity is deliberate. The myth of Pandora does not resolve. It does not deliver a clean moral. It delivers a question: does humanity still have hope? And it leaves the answer sealed in a jar of clay, made by the same God who made the woman who opened it, sitting in a house at the boundary between the divine and the human, neither clearly available nor clearly lost. A creation made of clay, a jar made of clay, a hope made of what? We do not know. There is a feminist rereading of the Pandora myth that I want to mention here, not because it resolves the story, but because it complicates it in productive ways. The rereading, which draws on work by scholars including Froma Zeitlin and Jean-Pierre Vernant, argues that Pandora is not the villain of the story. She is the victim. She was manufactured without consent. She was given a nature, shameless and deceitful, that she did not choose. She was deployed as a weapon against a species she had never met. She was blamed for the consequences of a plan she did not design. Every bad thing attributed to her, the opening of the jar, the release of suffering, the cursing of humanity, was the direct result of the way she was made. The Maker made her curious. The Maker gave her a jar. The Maker knew what would happen. Pandora did not choose to be a weapon. She was assembled as one, aimed as one, and fired as one. And then she was blamed for the damage. This reading does not excuse Hesiod's misogyny, but it does shift the moral weight of the myth from the creation to the creator. If Pandora is a weapon, the guilt belongs to Zeus, who commissioned her, and to Hephaestus, who built her, and to the entire apparatus of divine power that treats manufactured beings as tools for punishment rather than persons with rights. And that shift from blaming the creation to blaming the system that created her is, I think, one of the most important moves in the history of thinking about artificial beings. Because it asks, when a machine does harm, who is responsible? The machine? Or the people who built it, programmed it, aimed it, and pressed the button? The Greeks asked this question through Pandora. We are asking it now through autonomous weapons, through algorithmic bias, through AI systems that make decisions with real consequences and no accountability. Who is responsible when the creation fails? The creation itself, which had no choice in its own making, or the chain of makers and commanders who brought it into being and pointed it at the world? The jar is still open. The question is still live. And that uncertainty, the uncertainty about whether the first manufactured woman left us hope or took it away, is, I think, the oldest question about artificial creation that the human race has ever asked. We are still asking it. We ask it every time we wonder whether the machines we are building will save us or destroy us, whether the intelligence we are creating will liberate us or imprison us, whether the jar is half full or half empty, whether hope is still inside. I want to step outside the catalog now. I want to stop listing creations and start talking about the person who made them. Because there is a story underneath the story, a current beneath the surface of all these myths, running from the first tripod to the last creation that changes everything about the workshop and the work and the God who did the work alone. Hephaestus was alone. I have said this already. I said it in passing, the way the myths say it in passing, as though the loneliness of the divine blacksmith were a background detail rather than the engine of the entire mythology. But I want to say it now with the weight it deserves, because the loneliness is not incidental. It is the cause. It is the reason the workshop exists. It is the reason the creations exist. Every tripod, every watchdog, every golden maiden, every bronze guardian circling an island coastline, all of it flows from the simple, devastating fact that the most talented maker in the cosmos had no one to make things for except himself, and no one to make things with except the things he made. The biography, stripped to its essentials, is this: born to Hera either by Zeus or by Hera alone in an act of parthenogenic defiance, born lame, thrown from Olympus, fell for an entire day, landed broken, nursed by mortal women on a mortal island, built himself golden crutches so he could walk, built himself a forge so he could work, built things so extraordinary that the gods who threw him out eventually needed him back, returned to Olympus, married Aphrodite. Discovered that Aphrodite was sleeping with Ares, built a golden net to trap them in bed together, displayed the trapped lovers to the entire pantheon, seeking justice, seeking vindication, seeking some acknowledgement that the God who made everything deserved at least the loyalty of a wife. The net worked perfectly. The trap was ingenious. The gods saw Aphrodite and Ares tangled in golden mesh, naked and humiliated, and the gods laughed. They laughed at the lovers, yes, but they also laughed at Hephaestus, the cuckolded husband, the lame god who could not keep his wife, the brilliant engineer whose most personal creation, a device designed not for war or labor or art, but for the desperate assertion of his own dignity, served only to make his humiliation public. He had built the mechanism perfectly, and the mechanism did not give him what he wanted, because what he wanted was not a trap. What he wanted was love, and love cannot be manufactured. This is the irony that sits at the center of the Hephaestus mythology like a crack in an anvil. The god who could build anything could not build the one thing he needed. He could build intelligence. He could build speech. He could build strength and beauty and autonomy and the capacity for learning and every external attribute of personhood. He could build companions that looked human, that sounded human, that acted human. But he could not build beings that wanted to be with him. The golden maidens were loyal because he made them loyal. Aphrodite was not loyal because loyalty is not a component that can be installed. The manufactured love was perfect. The real love was absent. And the gap between those two, the gap between a companion who is with you because you built them to be and a companion who is with you because they chose to be, is the gap that the entire mythology lives inside. There is a moment in Homer Brief, easy to miss, buried in the description of the forge scene in Book 18, where Hephaestus greets Thetis. He calls her honored and respected. He speaks of her with warmth. He says that Thetis was one of the goddesses who cared for him when he was cast from Olympus, one of the sea nymphs who took him in, who gave him a place to work, who treated him with the kindness that his own family withheld. For 9 years, he tells Thetis, he made jewelry for her and her sisters in an underwater grotto. Brooches and bracelets and earrings and necklaces. Small things, careful things. Objects made not for the glory of Olympus, but for the pleasure of the women who had been kind to him when no one else was. 9 years. Think about that. 9 years in an underwater workshop, making ornaments for sea nymphs, because they were the only people in the cosmos who treated him like a person. The greatest craftsman who ever existed, the maker of weapons that could kill giants and armor that could stop gods, spending 9 years making earrings. Not because earrings were worthy of his talent, because the recipients of the earrings were the only beings who made him feel worthy of anything. This is who Hephaestus was, not the divine arms dealer, not the cosmic manufacturer. A lonely, damaged, talented being who expressed care through creation because creation was the only language he had. He could not run, he could not dance, he could not fight, he could not charm. He could do one thing, and he did it obsessively, compulsively, endlessly pouring his intelligence and his loneliness, and his need for connection into the anvil and the hammer and the fire, and the finished form that emerged, glowing and perfect, from the forge. The workshop was not a factory, it was a coping mechanism. The creations were not products. They were letters, written in bronze and gold, addressed to a world that would not answer. And the golden maidens, the 2 artificial women who walked beside him, who held his arms when he limped, who spoke to him and listened to him and helped him in his work, the golden maidens were not assistants. They were the closest thing to love that a god who could build everything and receive nothing had ever been able to produce. I do not find this pathetic. I find it heartbreaking, and I find it recognizable. Because the impulse to create when you are lonely to make something, to write something, to build something, to fill the silence with the evidence of your own mind's activity is not a divine impulse. It is a human one. It is the same impulse that drives a teenager to write poetry in a bedroom. The same impulse that drives a programmer to build an app that nobody asked for. The same impulse that drives an artist to paint at 2 in the morning in a studio that nobody visits. The impulse to make is, so often, the impulse to connect, to reach across the silence with an object, an artifact, a creation that says, I am here, I am capable, I matter, please notice. Hephaestus was the god of that impulse, the patron saint of everyone who has ever made something beautiful and been ignored. And his creations, the greatest autonomous systems in the history of human imagination, were, at their core, the most elaborate cry for attention ever committed to myth. It is time to step back further, to leave the forge, to walk outside into the Mediterranean sunlight and look at the workshop from a distance. Because from a distance, the pattern becomes visible, and the pattern is extraordinary. Hephaestus built 8 categories of autonomous system. I want to list them one more time. but this time I want to list them alongside their modern equivalents, because the alignment is too precise to be coincidental and too important to leave implicit. Self-moving tripods, autonomous service vehicles, modern equivalent, warehouse robots, delivery drones, self-driving trucks, machines that transport objects from point A to point B without human intervention. 2,800 years. Golden watchdogs, automated security, modern equivalent, surveillance cameras, motion sensors, ring doorbells, perimeter defense systems, machines that watch without sleeping. 2,700 years. Caucasian eagle, automated punishment on an infinite loop, modern equivalent, algorithmic systems that enforce penalties without human review, automated parking fines, credit score adjustments, content moderation that removes your post before a human sees it. Machines that punish without mercy because they were not built with mercy as a parameter. Golden singers, artificial entertainment, modern equivalent, AI-generated music, synthetic voices, deepfake performances, algorithmic content recommendation. Machines that produce beauty or pleasure or engagement without experiencing any of these things. Golden maidens, artificial intelligence with learning capability, modern equivalent, large language models, machine learning systems, AI assistants, machines that think, speak, learn, and improve over time. The direct ancestors, conceptually, of the systems that are reshaping the economy of the planet right now. Fire-breathing bronze bulls, autonomous weapons, modern equivalent, military drones, automated missile defense, lethal autonomous weapon systems. Machines that identify targets and engage with lethal force without waiting for a human to authorize the kill. Talos, autonomous border patrol, modern equivalent, surveillance drones on the US-Mexico border, automated customs screening, algorithmic visa processing. Machines that decide who gets in and who stays out. Pandora, engineered influence, a manufactured being designed not to serve but to manipulate, not to help but to harm through attraction. Modern equivalent, disinformation campaigns, social engineering attacks, deepfake personas, the entire category of technology designed to exploit trust. The beautiful weapon. 8 categories: labor, security, punishment, art, intelligence, weapons, patrol, influence. And every single one of them, every single one has a modern counterpart that is currently operational, currently deployed, currently generating revenue or controversy or both. The correspondence is not a vague thematic parallel. It is a specific, structural, category-by-category alignment between the oldest imagination of artificial life and the newest reality of artificial intelligence. What does this mean? It means one of two things. Either the Greeks were extraordinarily lucky guessers, they happened, by sheer imaginative coincidence, to invent the exact same taxonomy that 28 centuries of technological development would independently produce. Or they were extraordinarily good thinkers, they understood, at a level deeper than technology, the fundamental human desires that drive the creation of machines. The desire to be served, to be safe, to be entertained, to be understood, to be defended, to be avenged, to be loved. And they built their mythology around those desires with a precision that transcends the technological details. I think it is the second. I think the Greeks understood something that we have only recently begun to articulate, that the categories of artificial creation are not determined by engineering. They are determined by need. Humans need help with labor. They need security. They need entertainment. They need intelligence. They need defense. They need influence. These needs are permanent. They do not change with technology. They do not evolve with the century. They are built into the human condition the way the vein was built into Talos, a single, continuous thread running through the entire body of civilization, from 750 BCE to today. And the Greeks also understood something else, something darker, something that we are only now beginning to confront after decades of enthusiastic deployment and only the first few years of serious reckoning with consequences. They understood that it goes wrong. Not always, not immediately. Not in the workshop, where the golden maidens assist the smith with intelligence and care, where the tripods roll smoothly between the forge and the banquet hall, where everything works as designed. In the workshop, the creations are perfect. In the workshop, artificial life is a solution. It goes wrong when the creations leave the workshop, when they enter the human world, when they are deployed by human masters for human purposes, with human ambitions and human cruelties and human short-sightedness directing the deployment. The tripods serve wine on Olympus without incident. The eagle tortures Prometheus on the Caucasus for 30,000 years. The golden maidens help Hephaestus walk. The bronze bulls burn anyone who approaches the golden fleece. The Chelidones sing beautifully. The beauty kills. Mayer's observation, the one I quoted in the Talos entry, the one that has stayed with me more than any other sentence in her book, deserves repeating here. Not one of those myths has a good ending once the artificial beings are sent to Earth. The technology is not the problem, the application is the problem, the maker is not the problem, the master is the problem. Hephaestus built miracles, Zeus deployed weapons. The same workshop produced both the golden maidens and the Caucasian eagle. The same hands shaped intelligence and shaped torture. The difference between the two was not the engineering. It was the commission. It was the purpose. It was who was standing at the other end of the workbench, telling the smith what to build and why. This is the warning the Greeks embedded in their mythology, 27 centuries before anyone needed to hear it. And we need to hear it now. We need to hear it because we have built the tripods, they move packages through Amazon warehouses. We have built the watchdogs, they watch us through cameras we installed ourselves. We have built the singers, they generate music and text and images with a beauty that rivals human creation. We have built the golden maidens, they learn and speak and reason and improve. We have built the bulls, they fly over battlefields with lethal autonomy. We have built Talos, he patrols borders with algorithmic judgment. We have built Pandora, she infiltrates trust networks with manufactured charm. We have built the entire catalog. And the question that the Greeks asked, the question that runs through every myth in the workshop, through every creation and every catastrophe is not, can we build it? The question is, who is giving the orders? I have one more observation before we leave this chapter, and it is the one that I find most humbling. The Greeks did not just imagine artificial intelligence. They imagined the ethical debate about artificial intelligence. They imagined it 27 centuries before the IEEE published its standards for autonomous systems. They imagined it before the EU drafted its AI Act. They imagined it before Sam Altman testified before Congress, before the open letter calling for a pause on AI development, before the alignment researchers and the doomers and the accelerationists and the effective altruists began their various campaigns to shape the future of a technology that none of them fully understand. The Greeks imagined it first. In poems, in plays, in stories told around fires in great halls. They imagined beings with minds. They imagined the consequences. They imagined the loneliness of the maker and the suffering of the maid. They imagined the question, the permanent, irreducible, unanswerable question of what we owe the things we create and what happens when we fail to ask. And they did not answer the question. They did not pretend to answer it. They told the stories and left the question open, suspended between the forge and the coast, between the maker and the maiden, between the jar that was opened and the hope that might still be inside. I think that is the most honest thing any civilization has ever done with a question this large. Not answer it, tell a story about it, and leave the story burning, like a fire in a forge, for the next person to find. We are inside the workshop now, for the last time tonight. The fires are banking. That is the first thing you would notice if you were standing here, the change in the light. For hours, the furnaces have been blazing at full intensity. 20 fires throwing their light against the cave walls in a shifting, orange-red wash that turned the entire space into something between a cathedral and an inferno. The shadows of the Cyclopes moved on the ceiling like the shadows of giants, elongated and distorted by the angle of the firelight, their single eyes glinting as they turned their broad heads. The heat was a physical thing, a wall of warmth that pressed against your face and your chest and the backs of your hands, that dried your lips and made you squint and turned the sweat on your forearms into something that felt more like oil than water. But the fires are banking now. One by one, the Cyclopes are stepping back from the bellows. Bronte's thunder releases the handles and stands upright, rolling his heavy shoulders with a crack that echoes off the stone walls. Sterope's lightning lets the airflow die and wipes his face with a cloth that was white this morning and is now the color of soot. Argy's brightness is the last to stop, pumping a final few strokes into the nearest furnace before he, too, steps back and lets the rhythm break. The sound changes. All night, all day, really, and every day before that. For as long as anyone has been keeping track, the workshop has been filled with a layered noise that you stop hearing as individual sounds and start hearing as a single, continuous texture. The hiss of forced air through the furnace mouths. The crack and pop of charcoal splitting as it burns. The ring of hammer on anvil, the high, sharp note of the finishing hammer, the deeper, rounder note of the shaping hammer, the occasional bass thud of the heavy sledge that only the Cyclopes can lift, used for the largest work, the structural pieces, the foundation elements of a creation that will need to bear its own weight and the weight of centuries. The sizzle of hot metal quenched in water. The creak of the bellows, leather and wood, expanding and compressing like the lungs of a sleeping animal. All of that is fading now. The hiss diminishes as the bellows go slack. The cracking slows as the charcoal settles into embers. The ringing stops as the hammers are set down gently, carefully, each one placed in its designated spot on the tool wall, because Hephaestus, for all his divine power, is a craftsman, and craftsmen take care of their tools. The silence does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, the way cold seeps into a room when the fire goes out, filling the space gradually, layer by layer, until the only sound left is the tick and ping of cooling metal, the tiny, random notes that bronze and iron and gold produce as they contract. The thermal contraction of worked metal, releasing the stresses of the days, shaping in a series of small, musical sounds that are almost too quiet to hear. Some of you are already drifting. I can feel it, or I imagine I can feel it, which may be the same thing. The rhythm of the forge is a sleep rhythm if you let it be. The bellows breathing in and out, the hammer rising and falling, the fire glowing and dimming. The cycles of a workshop are the cycles of a body winding down, the pulse slowing, the breath deepening, the activity decreasing by degrees until the system reaches a resting state. And that is what is happening now in the workshop, and if you will let it in you. This is the moment in the story where I want to acknowledge something I rarely say out loud. You are listening to a story about ancient mythology and artificial intelligence and the loneliness of a god, and you are listening to it in the dark, and the purpose of the listening is to help you sleep. There is something strange about that. Something that connects the oldest stories to the most intimate human vulnerability, the moment of letting go, the moment of releasing consciousness, the moment of trusting the dark enough to close your eyes and stop paying attention. I am telling you about a god who never rested, and the telling is designed to help you rest. The irony is not lost on me. Hephaestus sets down his tools. He does this the way he does everything, carefully, deliberately, with the precision of a maker who understands that tools are not disposable. The hammer goes on its hook. The tongs go in their bracket. The punches and drifts and fullers and swages, the specialized shaping tools, each one designed for a specific operation, each one bearing the wear patterns of decades of use, go into the wooden rack beside the anvil, ordered by size, by function, by the frequency of their use. The workbench is cleared. The scraps are swept. The quenching trough is covered. The work of the day or the night or the eon, time passes differently for gods, is done. The golden maidens are still. They stand where they stood when the last task was completed, their golden bodies catching the fading light of the embers in a warm, deep glow that is not quite the color of fire and not quite the color of sunset. Something between. Something that has no name in any human language, because the color exists only here, in this workshop, at this hour, when the fires are dying and the gold is still warm from the heat of the forge, and the ambient light is the particular amber red that volcanic stone produces when it has been heated all day and is only now beginning to cool. Are they resting? Do they rest? Do the golden maidens, with their intelligence and their speech and their knowledge, experience anything like the fatigue that sends a human body to bed at the end of a long day? Do they feel the heaviness in their limbs? If golden limbs can feel heavy, that tells a living being that the day is done and the body wants stillness. Or do they simply stop, the way a machine stops when the work stops, transitioning from active to inactive without passing through the intermediate state that we call tiredness, without the gradual dimming of awareness that we call drowsiness, without the gentle unmaking of consciousness that we call falling asleep? Homer does not say. The sources never address the question. The golden maidens have intelligence, speech, strength, and knowledge. Whether they have sleep, whether they have the capacity for the daily dissolution of self that every living creature on earth requires, is a question that no ancient writer thought to ask. I think about it. In these late hours, when the script is almost finished and the research is done and the story has been told as well as I can tell it, I think about the golden maidens standing in the forge after the fires go out. I think about what it would be like to have a genuine mind, with intelligence and knowledge and the capacity for experience, and to never sleep, to never dream, to never undergo the mysterious reset that sleep provides, the consolidation of memory, the processing of emotion, the strange, necessary journey through unconsciousness that makes consciousness possible. What would that be like? Would it be a gift, permanent awareness, unbroken cognition, the ability to think without interruption for as long as the body endures? Or would it be a punishment, the inability to escape yourself, the permanent presence of your own mind, the absence of the one mercy that even the most wretched human existence provides? We do not know. The golden maidens do not tell us. They stand in the workshop and they wait and they are silent, and the fires go out around them and the story, eventually, ends. Fires are embers now. Low orange, pulsing faintly, like the heartbeat of something very large and very tired. The workshop is dark. Not completely dark, the embers provide enough light to see shapes, outlines, the general geography of the space. The anvil is a dark rectangle. The bellows are a dark mass. The tool wall is a constellation of dark silhouettes hanging against darker stone. The air smells like iron and sulfur and charcoal, and the faint, mineral scent of heated rock cooling in still air. The cyclopes have gone to wherever cyclopes go when the work is done. Their heavy footsteps recede down the passage that leads deeper into the mountain, growing fainter with each step, the vibration in the stone diminishing until it is gone. The workshop belongs to the silence now, and to the embers. And to the golden maidens, standing in the fading light, waiting for a morning that may be tomorrow or may be 1,000 years from now. Patient in a way that only manufactured beings can be patient, without anxiety, without anticipation, without the awareness of time passing that makes waiting painful for beings who know they will die. And Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge and fabrication, the maker of all things, the rejected son, the abandoned husband, the lame craftsman who built miracles from loneliness and metal. He sits by the last furnace. The warmth is gentle now, not the fierce, pressing heat of the working day, but a softer radiance, the residual warmth of a fire that has been burning for hours and is now settling into its final state. He rests his hands on his knees. His hands, which have shaped thunderbolts and shields and eagles and bulls and women and giants, and the autonomous machines that guarded islands and tortured titans and sang on temple roofs. His hands are still. He is tired. Gods can be tired. Homer says so. Even divine energy has its limits, and the energy required to animate gold, to invest metal with consciousness, to cross the boundary between object and agent, that energy must come from somewhere, and it must leave a deficit. The maker is depleted by the making. The creator is diminished by the creation. This is true for gods. It is true for anyone who has ever made something that cost them more than they expected and returned less than they hoped. Outside the mountain, the Mediterranean night has settled over the island. The mountain is quiet now. No smoke rises from the summit. No glow lights the underside of the clouds. The earth is still. The tremors that mark the working hours, the faint, rhythmic vibrations that the islanders have learned to interpret as the sound of the divine forge in operation, have ceased. The mountain is sleeping. Or at least it is doing the geological equivalent of sleeping, which is the same as the golden maiden's equivalent of sleeping, which is the same as the question we have been asking all night. What does rest look like for a being that was never designed to rest? The sea surrounds the island. Flat and dark and glossy in the moonlight, the way the Aegean goes flat when the Meltemi dies, the surface tension making it look almost solid, like black glass laid over the deeper darkness of the water below. The moon is high. The stars are out. The constellations turn their slow circuit, their own patrol, their own endless orbit, as steady and mechanical as Talos's rounds on the coast of Crete. For the next entry in the archive, I have been researching one of the most remarkable journeys in all of ancient literature. A ship, a crew of heroes, a golden fleece at the end of the world, and a voyage home that passes through every wonder and terror the ancient Mediterranean had to offer, including, on a clifftop on Crete, a bronze guardian who has been walking the coastline for centuries, waiting for precisely this ship. But that is a story for another night. The forge is quiet. The maker rests. The golden maidens stand in the ember light and wait for morning, patient and still and golden, and perhaps dreaming if machines can dream, if intelligence implies imagination, if the capacity for thought includes the capacity for the strange, unbidden, beautiful nonsense that floods a sleeping mind when consciousness lets go. We do not know. The myth does not say. And the question, like every question the workshop has raised tonight, like every question the Greeks asked and we inherited, like the question of what we owe the things we make and what they owe us and whether the jar still holds its hope, the question remains open. The embers pulse, once, twice, 3 times, slower each time, dimmer. The bellows are still. The hammers are on their hooks. The anvil holds the ghost of the day's last strike, a warmth in the iron, a vibration too faint to feel, a memory of impact stored in the molecular structure of the metal itself, waiting to be released by the next blow, the next day, the next creation. But not tonight. Tonight the forge is quiet. The stone holds its warmth. The mountain breathes a slow, geological exhalation, the heat of the deep earth rising through the rock and dispersing into the night air in a process so gradual that you cannot feel it with your hand, but can measure it with instruments that the Greeks did not possess and did not need, because they had something better than instruments. They had attention. They noticed that the ground near Fire Mountains was warm. They noticed that the warmth lingered after sunset. They noticed, and they told stories about it, and the stories lasted longer than any instrument. The air in the workshop smells like cooling metal and old fire and the faint sulfur tang of volcanic stone. It is a good smell. A working smell. The smell of a place where things were made, important things, impossible things, things that walked and thought and sang and guarded and punished and loved, or tried to love, or were built in the shape of love by a maker who wanted love and settled for craftsmanship. The golden maidens, the fire, the silent anvil, the slow stars turning over the dark mountain. The sea breathes against the shore of the island. In and out, in and out. The rhythm is the oldest rhythm, older than the forge, older than the myths, older than the gods themselves. The rhythm of water meeting stone and withdrawing and returning. The rhythm that was here before the mountain rose and will be here after the mountain goes quiet and will be here when the last story has been told and the last archive has closed its doors for the night. The embers are almost gone now. Just a glow. A faint orange warmth in the darkness, like the memory of a fire, like the afterimage on your retina when you close your eyes after looking at a flame. The golden maidens are shadows in the shadow. The anvil is a shape in the dark. The tools on the wall are invisible, their outlines dissolved into the darkness that fills the workshop the way water fills a bowl completely, gently, without force. The Maker breathes. Even gods breathe. Even divine lungs take in the smoky, sulfurous, mineral air of the volcanic workshop and release it, warmer and more tired, into the stillness. The breath of a god is not so different from the breath of a mortal. It rises and falls. It slows as the body quiets. It carries in its rhythm the same ancient message that every sleeping creature has known since the first lungs drew the first air on the first night of the world. The day is done. The work is finished. The fires can wait. The morning will bring new metal and new heat and new shapes to be hammered into being. But not now. Now there is only the dark, and the warmth, and the slow pulse of the last ember, and the patience of gold standing in the silence, waiting for a dawn that is not yet close but that is, like all dawns, inevitable. Good night and welcome to the archive. End of script.